no. Let me take care of that for you.
Get away from our mailbox!
Sir,
I don't want you to touch!
Pixar movies are considered to be some of the highest quality blockbuster animated movies to ever exist. But what is the ultimate Pixar movie? Introducing the ultimate Pixar tier list. For the next film in the ultimate Pixar tier list, it's time to take an emotional story to the skies in Up. This film explores the emotional relationship between an old man and a young Boy Scout with the backdrop of a relationship between the same old man and his now deceased wife. The parallels are clear and the adventure is action-packed. There's a lot to explore here, but the question remains, does Up really match its exceptional opening, or does it fail to ever reach those heights throughout the film? The first thing I want to establish about Up, answer the thesis question that I provided, is that Up has a spectacular 15 minutes. First 15 minutes, I should say. But it's kind of all downhill from there. That's not to say the second half of the film, or the last 2/3 of the film, is bad. Far from it. I actually think it's pretty good. And there's some really good stuff in there. But this film absolutely peaks at its first 15 minutes, which, may I say, the opening to Up is notorious for being one of the best openings to any movies, film, anything. And I agree with that. This is one of my favorite film openings ever. Not just animated, live action, film, TV, whatever. Openings to anything ever. It seriously is incredibly impressive how they tell this emotional story with an incredible score and no words to speak. Not even like with WALL-E where there were grunts and noises. No words spoken to show the life of Carl and Ellie and their in relationship to how they grew up as children. It's this sort of like sequence that's so beautifully orchestrated that sets everything up for the film. And it's true that the rest of the film doesn't ever match that quality of storytelling, but I don't think it necessarily needs to or has to. Now, if it did, it would honestly be a perfect film, probably the tippity top of the tier list, but in true essence it doesn't. But what the film does is something that I enjoy, don't get me wrong. I guess we'll break things down here throughout the film. I am gonna kind of go through this film in acts. Usually I'll talk about the themes, the music, the characters, and that's something I am going to touch upon, but I just really want to touch about what this film does in its 3-act structure. Now, I've already talked a lot about, not a lot, but enough, I think, about the first act. It is incredible, it is amazing. The sequence is so well done. The death of Ellie is so tragic. I cried on stream. It's so emotional, impactful. This film, actually, in general, has incredible visual comedy. I think the visual comedy in this movie is really solid, from the camera pans to the zoom ins to the silence to having a lot of funny cuts. This film knows how to tell visual comedy, as many previous Pixar films do. I think what this film lacks in comedy, though, is its script. I think that sometimes it kind of plays like the lulz, this is kind of random humor. Maybe not like lulz XD humor, but like it's a giant bird, or I'm pooping in the woods, hee hee, or like kind of stuff like that, mostly to do with Russell, which I don't think is necessarily a bad side character. I think he actually is perfect for a foil to Carl, and really completely necessary, needed for his character arc, Carl's character arc and growth. I just think often the humor in this film kind of feels like it feels a little shallow sometimes. It feels like there's less behind it than I would hope it would be. And maybe not as bad as like Cars, but it's kind of in the vein of maybe like A Bug's Life, or maybe even like Finding Nemo is a good example. Although I think Finding Nemo its script is way funnier. I think its visual humor is a lot better than its script. Now, when I say the script, I just mean the humor in the script. I think the script generally is pretty good. Leading us into the second act, I think the second act is not as strong as the first act. You know, showing off Carl's marriage and then having a contrast immediately to show the house now being basically having construction all around it, basically being gentrification. This film has a very strong message against, you know, like capital and corporate greed and the destruction of property. Really, like, the house is a character in this film. And I think, really, I talked about in the Cars video how Radiator Springs failed as a setting to be a character. This is probably the best example in any Pixar film of a setting being a character. But the thing is the house isn't bound to the ground. Obviously, it's called Up. It goes up in the sky and eventually to Paradise Falls, which is the goal of this film, to get the house there. Now, it's throughout the second act where this goal is put into question. And that's where the major themes of this film come in. Because Carl is so obsessed with getting this house exactly where it needs to be that he's willing to put himself and others at danger. So much so, this is his only goal. It's through bonding with Russell, however, where that goal somewhat changes. See, I think the second and third act of this film have a lot of like weird adventurous moments with birds and dogs and blimps, and it's sort of like this adventure that Ellie and Carl sort of played as kids, like this adventure. And in this film, in the second and third act, they're actually going on that adventure. It's really impressive that they kind of foreshadow that early on, and this is the actual adventure. And I think this stuff is a lot of fun. I think that coming into this film, I really was kind of like, oh, this stuff's going to be a little bit boring. And I think some of the chase scenes are a little bit longer than they need to be, and the pacing of this film is a little bit not phenomenal. It's a little bit messy, a little bit sloppy, but I think generally speaking, I like how the adventure matches what they set up in the beginning. While I would argue that this film humor isn't really its strong point, I would argue that its wild, wacky sort of like adventures are fun, but also sometimes weigh this film down a little bit too much. I just think that some of the outlandish stuff going on is humorous and funny, but can really be whiplash with the tonal shifts, because this second and third act have so many spark emotional moments. One of my favorite is Russell and I'm terrible with names. Terrible with goddamn names. Russell and Carl are basically having this conversation where they're talking about Russell's childhood, and it seems like it implies his divorce going on. This film talks about a lot of stuff. It shows off a miscarriage, or at least, without showing off, but shows that they had a miscarriage with the baby, tragic stuff and real deep, dark shit. But I think that this film, those emotional scenes so well, and in this scene, there's just this really connection between Carl and Russell, in which Russell says, "Cross your heart that you'll protect Kevin," and that of course reminds him instantly of Ellie doing the same thing as a child, and he says, "Yeah, I'll cross my heart," and that ultimately leads to one of the scenes that I like the most in the film, is in which he has to make a decision later on, but I'll talk about that in a second. Leading up to that decision, I think that this film has a lot of themes of dedication and loyalty. But I think that, Carl is sort of in the middle here. Russell is sort of this pure version of loyalty. He's very loyal to Carl and loyal to helping him out, while Carl sort of wavers between having a healthy, loyal relationship to one that's a little bit obsessive and a bit unhealthy. And on the other side of the spectrum, we have the villain of this story being no other than Carl's child hero. I really enjoy the contrast that Charles Muntz has to Carl. I think as a villain, he is okay. I don't think he's super, super solid as a villain, but as a good foil to the protagonist, which I guess, or rather an anti-foil, which is what I guess the antagonist is supposed to be. Charles is pretty good at that, because he, in a lot of ways, matches Carl. He's very obsessive about getting something, so much to the point that his dedication becomes very unhealthy, and that is capturing the bird. And then Carl, later in the film, is caught between two decisions. He's caught between helping the bird and when Charles puts his house at risk at putting on fire, saving Ellie or saving the house, who is definitely he characterizes as Ellie. He calls Ellie the house. It's their house. Ellie's personified in that house. They do it a little obviously, but that's what that is. And he's caught between two decisions because he crossed his heart that Ellie to take her on this adventure. While she was dying, he crossed his heart, but he also crossed his heart to Russell to protect the bird, and he's caught between two situations. Now, in this case, Kevin, Russell are alive. They need help in the present, while the house, an embodiment of Ellie, is gone. Something he needs to move on from. And that's one of the major themes of this film is grief, moving on. Carl is often very angry and grumpy in this film, and you understand why. He lost everything that he built up to in his life, but he can't, his arc is learning to let go of Ellie. To realize I need to be loyal to stuff that's alive and care for stuff that is alive rather than stuff that is gone. I think that theming is super interesting and clever, and it's done really, really well when later in the film, and probably one of my favorite scenes in the film, where he's looking through the adventure book, and through it he sees all pictures of the past, and then says, the adventures we're going to go on. And he has this sort of sad look on his face where he's like, I'm never going to get to go on these adventures with her. I'm never going to get to do this stuff with her. Until he realized that she filled it in. He lived his adventure. He did stuff with her. He married her. They worked together. They had all of these experiences together. And it's honestly one of the most emotionally heavy parts of the entire film. It's incredibly well done. And it all boils into his completion of his arc, where he literally moves things out of the house. The chairs they sat in, the furniture they bought and saved and experienced together, all to save the living, being Russell. Now, I think this character arc is super well done. I think the relationship between him and Ellie and Russell and their relationship with the past and with death and with grieving is all real good shit. The third act of this film just doesn't really do it for me. Now, it's not to say the third act is bad. Trust me, it is not bad. All the shit I've talked about so far is S tier stuff. I think the first act is S tier. Like these scenes I've been talking about are S tier. The rest of the film with the adventure stuff is more like B tier maybe. The third act for me is like C tier. Maybe even bordering on D in some points. Now, do not get me wrong. I think the ending of this film is really, really good. I think some of the whimsical stuff and the music and the adventure, all really, really good. Trust me, the soundtrack is bopping. These characters are, for the most part, really well written, especially Carl. And I think that the animation is all really, really good. I love the colors in this film with the balloons. One of my favorite set pieces is when he's flying over the city and you can see like reflection. One of my favorite shots is when the balloons come through this little kid playing in like an apartment complex and you see all the colors reflecting off the windows. It is the rendering, all that for the time is very impressive. It's all super good looking, but I just think the third act of this film is just not super strong. It kind of goes down in a way. I think the first act is fantastic, phenomenal. The second act is good, solid, and the third act is it's okay. I just think the last action set piece is kind of, has a lot of clever gags. One of my favorite is when Carl and Charles are fighting and their backs are like cracking and they're in pain. But sometimes like the stuff with Doug and the other dogs just feel a little bit, a little bit unnecessary. It just feels like some of this film just has some really deep emotional stuff to tell, and some other is silly, which I like in my films, but just doesn't really match the tone, and just sometimes just feels a little bit too out there for me. I don't know. Like, I like this stuff typically, but in this film it just feels a little bit out of place. It's almost like if in Ratatouille, and I know it's a rat controlling a chef's head, it's bizarre within itself, but that is sort of still grounded and played in a way that sort of is humorous but also works. It would be like if in Ratatouille, like just some like really out of nowhere shit just start happening, which I guess it does, but like where they kidnap the inspector. But like sometimes like that film I feel like balances that really really well between wildish, humorous, crazy stuff and really grounded storytelling and emotional storytelling. This film I feel like kind of has a lot of tonal shifts, and the pacing just can never really get its footing. And the third act is entirely significant of that. Not regarding the last scene, which I love, where Russell gets his badge, and of course he gives the Ellie badge, passing down the torch. All that is fantastic. I love that. It's just this sprinkles of stuff in the second and most of the third that just feels very bogged down. And don't get me wrong, I love like the dog fighting sequence. It's kind of cute. They're in planes, but that shit also is like a little bit too much for me. I don't know, like this film just sometimes feels a little bit tonally inconsistent to the point where it just feels a little bit whiplashy. Now, I do enjoy the second act, and overall, I do really enjoy this film. I just think it has some real glaring flaws and real issues maintaining a consistent tone. And it just feels like this film really shifts once the house leaves and they get to Paradise Falls, and a lot of it I like. There's some really great flash in the pans, brilliant moments, like I said, with Carl and I keep forgetting his name, Carl and Russell. Their conversations are usually pretty humorous and a lot of times emotionally deep. I really enjoy, like I said, that scene where he has to choose between his house and saving Kevin, his whole character arc there. And I think his ultimate decision to, leave everything behind, completing his character arc, doing what Charles could never do, letting things go, moving on, caring about things in the present, and really appreciating everything that he had and realizing he did have memories, he did have adventures, but they weren't, these idealistic ones that they dreamed as kids. He got to live a life and with someone he loved, and that's really all you can really ask for sometimes. And he is now experiencing those adventures, except with someone else, someone different. All that is beautiful. It's all sprinkled in with stuff that for me is sometimes really, really fun and adventurous and cute, and sometimes just a little bit tonally inconsistent and a little bit, I don't know the right word. Like, it just feels a little bit generic, a little bit stale. Like, it just doesn't pop. And when it pops too much. My criticism of this film is very hard because I really want to say this is one of my favorite Pixar films. And I guess at the end of the day, looking at where I rank it probably amongst the rest of them, it definitely is in the top echelon of Pixar films. I think it has my favorite scene of any Pixar film, my favorite sequence of any Pixar film being the opening sequence. That's one of my favorite sequences in any film. Easily my favorite sequence in any Pixar film. It has some of my favorite Pixar scenes, but the second and third act just are a little bit tonally inconsistent, and sometimes, go from here to there to here to there. Now, I will say I like this film a lot more than I thought I was going to. I thought when I came into this film I was really going to enjoy the first act and did not really like the second two acts at all, because I really kind of forgot about them. But that is not the case. Like I said, there's a lot of stuff in the second act and third act I like. Actually, I would say a lot of it I really do like, but there's also a good amount of it that just sticks out to me as a little bit tonally inconsistent, a little bit sour, and it's just, I don't know, like it doesn't really, like, the writing is solid, but it's a little bit, a little bit safe and not really too adventurous, and a little bit, difficult focusing on what it needs to. Now, I think the character writing is all really, really well. Like I said, I love the comparison between the protagonist, the antagonist, the protagonist and his child companion, and of course his dead wife. But I think that the whole arc, or the whole parts with Doug and with Kevin can be funny at sometimes, but you have like the whole squirrel bit and other stuff like that where they play that humor up a little bit too much, and I think sometimes it can really bog the film down and get in the way. Now, look, do I think this film is bad? No. Do I think this film is good? Yes, very good. But there are flaws that weigh this film down. Incredible soundtrack, does what it needs to do, and I think they definitely achieve what they are going for. I just ultimately think that this film is a bit inconsistent for me. But I think when it hits, it fucking hits. It doesn't, the misses are not as big as misses maybe in films like A Bug's Life and especially Cars. Like the misses in this film just feel a little bit head scratchy, or a little bit like, all right, like, can we move on now? But then when we get to the good stuff, damn, is that shit so fucking good. So obviously, lot of feelings about this film. I'm sort of all over the place. So overall, I do like it, but where do I put this film? Where do I rank this film? I'll tell you guys right now, this was the hardest film I had to rank. It does not come even close. Cars definitely was between two spots, as was movies like Monsters, Inc. Placing Wall-E was very difficult, but no. This is the hardest. I actually have gone back and forth on where I put this. I wanted to put it in one rank, and then I said, no, I'm going to put it in another rank, and no, I'm going to put it in one rank and the other rank, and which rank do I put it in? And I decided. Now, I will say, at the end of this tier list, I may go back and touch up some ranks, because there are some films in the future that I may see, and I may decide, like, I like it better than this film, but not this film, so I'm going to have to move some films around to really justify this. And that is totally fair. Also, some of these films may age better than others. I may look back and say, you know what? No, I do really like that film a lot more than this one, or I think it really does belong in this echelon. These two don't belong in the same tier. This belongs above. You know what I'm saying? So I'm not 100% sure if films will get moved, but if spots get moved, there's a great chance this film gets moved. And just be aware of that. So I guess now it is time to rank this film. Took a long time to do it. I'm still kind of on the fence on it, but I ultimately had to do that. And I'm confident, and I'm going to stick with it. If anyone challenges it, I'm ready to fight back. But where am I going to rank Up? Well, Up is truly an emotionally magical film that takes on a wild adventure with a lot of bizarre concepts. While its peak truly is in the film's amazing opening and speechless segments, it still maintains a good story throughout, to my surprise. It blends whimsical adventures and emotional character writing super strongly. The strong tonal shifts can be a bit jarring and off-putting, but its themes of loyalty, grief, and life experiences relative to death is super strong. Its score elevates this film beyond and above with one of Pixar's best musical motifs throughout. Not to say this film doesn't have any flaws, however. While its thematic hooks are strong with the villain, he isn't overall as strong as other Pixar villains. Russell is often hit or miss for me. This film has really strong visual humor, but its other humor hits a lot but misses on occasion. Its second and third act never quite reach the height of the first, but I have no doubt its rich character writing, emotional hooks, and thematic elements make up for its film shortcomings that are there. But again, it can't pull down the heights this film reaches too far. With my favorite sequence in any Pixar film, it would be a crime for me to say this film is anything but a really good Pixar film. And a really good one it is, but it still has some noticeable flaws. Up floats right around a B rank. The film teeters between an A and a B rank, so much so it is a high B rank. It was very tough for me to place this as a low A or a high B rank, since it has so many strong scenes and sequences with a lot of great elements. But there is just enough flaws in this film to put this movie at a B tier, even if it is a really good film for Pixar, and a really strong B tier, one that may eventually be moved when I reevaluate this tier list, but for now sits at a high B tier. Oh, this was tough, no doubt. This was tough. I did not know where to place this film. I still am sort of like, it's hard for me because I put it at B. I'm like, no, it's stuff. It's positive are so good. I gotta put it at A. But then when I put it at A, I'm like, but its negatives are strong enough for me to say it's not really an A. Like, I don't think this film is as good as Monsters, Inc. or Finding Nemo. I just don't think it's that quite good. But it may be good enough to really belong in that tier because it has some scenes that I think are my favorite of any Pixar film. But overall, I think it's a B tier movie. And a really good B tier movie. And don't get it mistaken. B tier's good. A tier, S tier is spectacular, as good as it gets. A is really good. And B it's pretty good. Up is pretty good. I like it a lot. Thumbs up. That being said, we now move to our next film, which is no other than Toy Story 3. The gloves are on for these ones. This film. These ones? This film. I misspoke. This film. Because Toy Story 3 is going to be interesting. It is only our second sequel. Toy Story 2 is obviously our first sequel. This is our second. And we have a lot of sequels and prequels and spin-offs and such coming in the near future. But for now, we're about to tackle only our second sequel, and a number 3 at that. This next video is going to be a lot. For those who remember when Toy Story 2 came out, when it came out, Jesus, when my Toy Story 2 video came out, that when I put it in the tier list, I kind of compared it to Toy Story 1, but then also analyzed that as its own film. I'm doing that with Toy Story 3. However, I have to compare it to 2 other films, both in its rank and in its content. That's going to be a lot. I think I'm confident in saying Toy Story 3 is going to be the longest one. I have a lot to say about it, and while leaning upward moderately, there's the average length of most of these videos, Toy Story 3 is definitely going to be the longest one. I have a lot to say about this film, and I haven't actually seen it in a while, and of course you can watch it with me on Twitch and see what I think about it, because this is the film that a lot in my brain, occupies a lot of brain space, but I haven't seen it in quite a while. I know everything about it. Not as familiar as it with the first one, the second one, where I can just quote him a lot, but I remember seeing this movie first day in the theaters. I have a lot of sentimental attachment to this movie, okay? And I'm very excited to talk about it and rank it on this tier list. And I feel like it's going to be a film that's very difficult to rank, especially compared to its first 2 films. That being said, this film may be this video for this film may be a long one. I actually may need 2 weeks to work on this because it may be that long. I'll give you guys an update when we get closer. For those updates, you can go to my Twitter or my Discord, especially my Discord. But regardless of that, forget that for a second. We're going to watch Toy Story 3. It's going to be hype. You can catch it with me the same day this video came out on Twitch. This comes out at 10:30 a.m. We'll watch it sometime in the evening. Again, Twitter and Discord for updates on that, especially Discord. And I'm very excited to watch that with you. It's going to be fun revisiting this world again and really analyzing another Toy Story film. And will I cry like I did Up? I don't know. I don't know. Huh. We'll have to see. We'll have to get a cry meter. Ugh. I don't want to cry again on camera. No. It's gonna happen. It's probably gonna happen.